this just keeps getting crazier for the Toronto Raptors. Of course, all eyes have been on the Giannis Antetokounmpo trade sweepstakes and the Raptors having mutual interest with Giannis in a trade going down. But now a new report has dropped revealing Karl Anthony-Towns is another suitor for the Toronto Raptors. Of course, this team does have a lot of players out there at that forward position, but the price would be cheaper than a Giannis Antetokounmpo, and things are getting very, very weird in New York, which makes a wild, another shocking trade going down, all the more likely for this New York Knicks team. So we're going to break down what reports are coming out on both sides of this, why Karl Anthony-Towns is being linked to the Toronto Raptors, and whether or not it makes sense for the Toronto Raptors to pivot away, or if they don't land Giannis, go in the direction of a Karl Anthony-Towns. So lots of stuff to dive into. So let's just jump straight into it, because if you weren't watching the finals, the Eastern Conference Finals, there was a lot of storylines going on, but one that leaked immediately. This was a prep story. This immediately dropped as soon as the conference finals was over. Basically, a quote came out saying that publicly the Knicks players made veiled comments all season about poor communication causing their inconsistencies behind the scenes. They and coaches expressed frustrations with Karl Anthony-Towns' defensive habits, less concerned with his talent level and more with his process on that end. Too often, Towns executed incorrect coverages without communicating why he did it. After it became a theme, players worried Towns didn't grasp the importance of the matter. So this is a planted story. This came out immediately following the Knicks Eastern Conference Finals loss, and as what happens when there's ugly sort of flame out losses out there in your for your team, there ends up being scapegoats. And Karl Anthony-Towns, with this big contract, with his big deal recently acquired and all those types of things, he was the guy that was thrown under the bus for the New York Knicks. I was about to say the Minnesota Timberwolves, but for the New York Knicks. And all eyes. Oh, this is why he was traded from the T-Wolves. This is why he was dealt out. This is why he's gone. Yada, yada, yada. There was a bunch of this reports came out, despite the fact Karl Anthony-Towns had some monster games. Frankly, was the reason that the Knicks probably didn't get swept in that series against the Pacers, because he had a big game 3, I believe it was. So Karl Anthony-Towns is a guy that's getting disrespected. There's a lot of memes of the old Zesty Towns going on, so I see some people roasting that and all of those types of things. But right now, there's a lot of speculation about whether or not a trade is incoming for Karl Anthony-Towns. Now, there has been some buzz about him going to the Phoenix Suns for Kevin Durant and getting that whole trade going, because the Knicks are in a very difficult spot cap-wise here now at this point. They gave OG a lot of money. They have Mikal Bridges on a big contract. Of course, Jalen Brunson's making a bunch of bread. They have a lot of players making a ton of money, and Karl Anthony-Towns making $50+ million per year is where things get messy. So that's where this comes in. That's where the Toronto Raptors getting in the mix is getting involved. So basically, the Phoenix Suns have emerged as the favorites to land Karl Anthony-Towns if the Knicks trade him, and the Toronto Raptors are once again listed as a suitor. So less odds, like the Raptors are second. There's a couple of places that have the Raptors first. For Giannis, we are down on the list in terms of trading for Karl Anthony-Towns. But one of the big reasons why the Toronto Raptors are on this list is because, again, Karl Anthony-Towns is a star player that could end up getting dealt. But the juicy part of this is the report that came from Brian Windhorst of ESPN, if I have the correct quote coming out, and it's not here saved specifically, but as I've discussed in recent videos, the Toronto Raptors are hunting after big fish. They want big names out there added to this team, and they want to expedite this rebuild. After trading for Brandon Ingram, they want to cash in on some of the assets, the stockpile of players that they built up, and want to get back into contention next season. And say what you want about Karl Anthony-Towns. I'll dive deeper into the stats and the fit and everything in this video, but Karl Anthony-Towns is a big name. He fits that mold. He fits that style, and the Raptors are in an interesting spot in their big man position, which we will take a look at. So that's why he's being linked. That's why he's getting associated. That's why people are connecting the dots about Karl Anthony-Towns coming to the Toronto Raptors. So does it make sense? Well, let's take a look at the stats first. So we hinted on there. Karl Anthony-Towns, for his people, defense, whatever. He's 29 years old. He averaged 24 points per game, 13 rebounds, 3 assists, shot 42% out there from the three-point line. Interestingly enough, only shot 33% on corner threes. He loves those above-the-break three-point shots. Did have a few turnovers for a big man and stuff, but 1 steal per night, 0.7 blocks. Not much of a rim protector, even though he did do some of that out there with the Minnesota Timberwolves at times. Back in college, I saw some highlights going like, what happened to Karl Anthony-Towns? But he is one of the most elite shooting big men of all time. He could score, and as we saw in the playoffs, he had some big moments for the New York Knicks and, making a run there. So Karl Anthony-Towns is a guy that is certainly a phenomenal basketball player, a phenomenal basketball talent. He's in the prime of his career and is a guy that, frankly, around a Scottie Barnes would be an extremely nice fit just due to his floor spacing, due to everything that he provides out there as a stretch big man on the offensive end. I mean, you open up the lanes with, Scottie Barnes for Brandon Ingram, for RJ Barrett, with Karl Anthony-Towns on this squad, then that is very, very nice to see. But of course, you have to give something up, and I'd imagine the player that the Knicks would want back is a Jakob Poeltl style player, and maybe one of our wings. Likely it'll be Poeltl, one of our young wings, a Gradey Dick, Jacoby Walter, an Ochai Agbaji, one of those types of dudes, and then probably some draft pick compensation in terms of a trade package. But the reason Poeltl will be so fitting for the Knicks is because they're in a cap crunch here right now. Now, if they trade Towns, they might be able to get out of it, but basically, Mitchell Robinson is likely on his way out. He's been thrown out in a bunch of different trade discussions as well, and while he was good in the postseason, had some big moments, he's dealt with a ton of injuries and isn't really that reliable big man in terms of playing 48 minutes a night. Of course, not specifically 48 minutes, but the whole full 40. He's a guy that has a lot of minutes restrictions, but Jakob Poeltl coming in to play that center position for the Knicks. He has been a phenomenal player at the center spot this season. 15 points per game, 10 rebounds, 3 assists. It might have been lost in all the losing and stuff, but Poeltl had a career year this season, is just 29 years old himself, and is a phenomenal defender. He can anchor a defense. He can do a lot of things out there for the squad, and has shown hints of really developing a three-point shot. I'm referring to the quotes and the stuff that came after the season, and that one first quarter three we saw in the fifth last game of the season, whatever the heck it was, for Jakob Poeltl. So looking at this, it is an interesting sort of situation that's getting thrown out there for a Karl Anthony-Towns, the type of packages. But if the Knicks are this low on him and he has that big contract, this is an opportunity to land one of the big fish. Of course, you have to give up some assets to make it happen. If we have to throw in a Scottie and Ingram, well, Ingram won't be traded, but if we have to throw a bunch of assets like that in a Karl Anthony-Towns trade, that makes it tougher. But if it is for Jakob Poeltl, it will be tough to see the Raptors be in a much more difficult position with rim protection and stuff if we're running Karl Anthony-Towns as the full-time 5. So, you have to be banking on a Shea. You have to be banking on a Common Malawatch getting drafted to this team. Again, that's where a lot of moving pieces happen at this time of year to know what's going on. But if the Raptors could buy low on one of these trades, get a big fish in Karl Anthony-Towns for a team that is undervaluing him here now at this point, it could be an interesting opportunity for this squad. So I'm not shutting out completely. Of course, it wouldn't just there'd have to be some other auxiliary moves made to make sure we do have a beefed up enough front line. But offensively, Scottie Barnes, Brandon Ingram, Karl Anthony-Towns, and then on your backcourt you have IQ and RJ Barrett. That's a good squad, man. That's a good offensive firepower squad. That's going to be really tough to compete with any team. Of course, scoring defensively, it would be some issues there to deal with for Darko, Rajaković, Masai, Ujiri out there in terms of schemes, in terms of planning and stuff. But I don't know. I'm not as overtly against it as I may have emotionally reacted to at the start. But realistically, the Raptors are pretty high on Jakob Poeltl. Doug Smith came out and said this directly in regards to Domantas Sabonis talks. So, if the Raptors aren't interested in Sabonis, who's another one of these players that's available, I wouldn't be shocked if Karl Anthony-Towns ends up going down that similar direction when trade negotiations go down. So let me know what you guys think about all this in the comment section down below. You guys best thing as far as subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. Anyways, I'm signing out. Cheers.